Good afternoon. Good afternoon. Good afternoon. There we go. Enthusiasm, that's what we're looking for. Now you know the drill, turn off your cell phones or silence them, whatever it is. April 3rd, which is a Thursday evening, we'll start our Vietnam War series, which will last for 8 weeks until May 22. The brochures are on the table. It's all set. Next week on the 11th, Margaret Brennan will be here to talk about Agnes Westbrook Morrison, who's the first woman to graduate from the West Virginia University College of Law. And she practiced law here in Wheeling. On March 18th, we'll have our post-St. Patrick's Day celebration. We'll call it a recovery day. And Laura Tracy Bentley, the poet, will be here, and her book is called Looking for Ireland. And Charles May, who's a Celtic fiddleist from Pittsburgh, will be here to play some music for you. So we'll have both words and music and photographs of Ireland. That'll be on the 18th of March. Our guest today is a Pittsburgh sports writer, Jim Wexell. He was born in Chicago and graduated from the University of Pittsburgh. He's covered the Steelers since 1995. He's written books like Polamalu, Steeler Nation, A Pittsburgh Team, An American Phenomena, and his newest book is the big one here, The Pittsburgh Steelers, An Illustrated Timeline, loaded with photographs, well-researched vignettes, and it's a must for every Steeler fan. So get yours today. Here he is, backed by popular demand, Jim Wexell.
So nice. I really like being here. You guys are always so nice to me. Listening to those other guests coming, I'm wondering, what am I doing here? I'm poets and violin players. I last year at this time, I was in the final week of writing this, and I'm a procrastinator. If you know any journalists, they're probably procrastinators. And I was buried at my desk, and the reason I could wait until the last 2 months to write this thing is because I had 10 tablets full of research. I wrote Polamalu in 2020. I wrote On the Clock on the Steelers draft history in 2022. So that was 1 year after another of writing. So I took a year off and decided, just read and take notes and call it work. I do cover the team, so I do have a steady job, but I like to write books, and so I just read Steelers history. The books I hadn't read, I read them all, and I took notes, and I had five books I was going to do, and this belongs here, and I'd underline it, and this would be good for this book, and this would be good for a history book if I ever did a history book. And wouldn't you know, I got a call from publishing house, Reedy Publishing, that said, we're looking for somebody to write a history book. Do you have any research? Can you do it? I said, man, I got 10 notebooks full of research. You called the right guy. So with all that research, I waited and waited and waited until the season was over, and then in 2 months, put it all together. And it's full of photos. And it's rather expensive. It's a coffee table book. It's $42 right now. The rest of these books are $15. But this is the new one that's out, and you can get it at any bookstore. I have 7 left, and so we'll see how that goes, but I have other books too. Anyway, with all that history and all that history of the Steelers done, I finally got into a history book that I've been meaning to read for so long, a real book, Churchill's biography, The Last Line. It was an 800-page book, and I started reading it, and they didn't use the name Hitler until page 750, and I said, man, they got a lot of ground to catch up in these last 50 pages. And I found out there's part 2, and then there's part 3. So it's called The Last Lion, 2,600 pages. I just finished it a couple of weeks ago. And there was one, it wasn't a quote, it was something the author wrote that maybe underline. I thought I'd underline all kind of Churchillian quotes, but I didn't. They're great stuff, but maybe nothing I could relate to football, so maybe I didn't underline it. But I underlined this. Said, yet Roosevelt was only approaching the business of war in the same way he approached politics. He liked to allow events to proceed until a choice of action became self-evident. And that was important for Churchill because Churchill, he had to pull Roosevelt into this thing to fight Hitler. And Churchill had many, many fronts. He could have gone any option. He really didn't know what to do. Stalin wanted him to invade France, German-occupied France, to take the pressure off Stalin over in Russia and the Germans in Russia fighting over there. But Churchill knew he wasn't ready, and then he talked Roosevelt into coming in. And Roosevelt wasn't ready. America wasn't ready. And Stalin kept, please invade France, but they weren't ready. And Roosevelt talked Churchill into waiting for it to become self-evident. And I like that because I was giving my daughter the same advice. She's in her 20s. She moved away. She has a job. She doesn't know whether to buy or rent. She doesn't know whether to get married or not, but she has decided to get married. She doesn't know whether to have kids, doesn't know whether to hunker into the job she has. I mean, we all think of the 20s. Do nothing. I mean, that's Dad giving advice. This is what I could do. And for Browns fans, it's the Browns' dilemma, too. It has to do with franchise quarterbacks. Navigating the post-franchise quarterback wilderness is the name of today's speech. And the Steelers have had one franchise quarterback after another smack them in the face, whether they've acted appropriately, whether they've known it was self-evident, or not, has been up to them. Sometimes they have, many times they haven't. And so I'm going to take you through the history of the greatest quarterbacks in NFL history that the Steelers have had a shot at, and for one reason or other have passed or gone all in on it. And we'll take that up to today and see where history leads them into any decision makings. So we start back in 1936. The Chief was a big baseball fan. He was such a big baseball fan, he named his team the Pirates. Finally got into the NFL and he named them the Pirates. His favorite athlete was Honus Wagner. And so he had to know when the draft started, this was the second draft in 1936, he had to know the great baseball prospect at the time, Slingin' Sammy Baugh. Now, Slingin' Sammy got that nickname from playing third base at TCU, not from playing quarterback. He was the quarterback, but he was a great third baseman. And the Steelers were drafting fifth that year, and they needed someone who could sling the ball. And they were drafting fifth, and Sammy Baugh was available. But Sammy Baugh signed with the St. Louis Cardinals of baseball, the Gas House Gang, one of the great baseball teams of the time. And so the Chief had to know that, being the big baseball fan he was. He passed on Sammy Baugh, the next pick, the Washington Redskins. They took Sammy Baugh, whether he was a baseball player or not. And, of course, that summer, Sammy realized that he was buried behind some great members of the Gas House Gang, Marty Marion, Frankie Frisch, Pepper Martin, great infielders. And Sammy, he wanted to play, so he decided to play football, and he became one of the greatest quarterbacks of all time. And kind of embarrassed the Chief. The Chief wanted that kind of passing game. He had drafted Whizzer White and signed Whizzer White, and he saw the Redskins had three, triplets even today. The running back, the receiver, the quarterback. Triplets even today are the sign of a great offense. Ben Roethlisberger, Le'Veon Bell, Antonio Brown. I mean, they had a lot of flaws on that team, but those three could get them near a Super Bowl anyway in 2016. So the Chief was impressed by the triplets. Sammy Baugh did all that. He set a playoff rookie record that wasn't broken until a guy named Russell Wilson came along in 2012. So the Chief wanted himself a Sammy Baugh, and he made a trade with the Bears, future first-round pick for a guy named Eggs Mansky. He was a star receiver to go along with Whizzer White. All he needed was a passer, but he traded his future number one, the second pick of the draft, to the Bears. And the Bears drafted Sid Luckman. So that was the two greatest quarterbacks of the 30s that were right in the Steelers' wheelhouse, and they passed on both. The next great Hall of Fame quarterback to come their way was in 1948, Bobby Lane. This was the first iteration of Bobby Lane. He was at Texas, and he became a great quarterback under the T formation. It was brand new. Sid Luckman had pioneered the T formation, as a matter of fact, for the Bears. And Bobby Lane, with the Texas coaching staff, went to the Bears camp and learned the T formation, became an exceptional T formation quarterback. And the Steelers drafted him out of their draft magazines in 1948. And he took one look at that single wing that the Steelers refused to get out of. Jock Sutherland, in fact, had led the Steelers single wing to the playoffs in 1947. He died in 1948. They drafted Bobby Lane anyway, and he said, I'm going to go to the other league, the AAFC, if you guys persist in trying to sign me, or otherwise trade me. They traded him to the Bears T formation team. He became a great Hall of Fame T formation quarterback. A real dry mouth, sorry. Okay, so that's, what do we got? Sammy Boss, Sid Luckman, Bobby Lane. Let's go to 1955, John Unitas, another Steelers draft pick. You know, he was a Pittsburgh kid, and Dan Rooney was one of the best high school quarterbacks, and he was in the Catholic League, and he was at North Catholic, a senior. And he remembered Johnny Unitas as a junior. John Unitas had a self-inflicted gunshot wound. It was innocent. I forget how he did it. It wasn't as nefarious as it sounds. But he had a self-inflicted gunshot wound, and he played that week with a splint around his middle finger. And Dan Rooney watched that game, young Dan, and he saw him throw a ball 50 yards in the air, and it never left Danny. He remembered that all the way up until 1955. And of course, John Unitas was named All-Catholic League quarterback that year. Dan was second team. So Dan really remembered that John Unitas kid from Mount Washington. And so in 1955, John Unitas had gone to Louisville. He was too small and skinny to get a big-time scholarship, but Dan Rooney watched him. And Dan Rooney was a really young guy working for his dad, and he was part of the draft team. And they got into the 9th round, and they had a funeral director, was their scouting department head of personnel, a funeral director, Ray Byrne. And Dan was just helping him. And Dan finally in the 9th round said, we got to take this guy. You wouldn't believe the ball I saw him throw once. So they took John Unitas. The coach didn't like him. The coach thought he was stupid. The coach never gave him one snap in the preseason, and they cut him. Of course, 3 years later, he was in the greatest NFL game of all time, won the championship for the Colts. So that's another quarterback the Steelers let go, John Unitas. I mean, this is a list of some of the greatest of all time that smacked the Steelers right in the face. In 1957, Cleveland Browns had gone through a year after Otto Graham retired, and they realized, you know, quarterback's pretty important. We need a quarterback. And there was a local kid from Alliance named Len Dawson. Ohio State really wanted him, but he went to Purdue because an assistant coach had recruited him that Len really liked. His name was Hank Stram. Went to Purdue, and Len Dawson set all kind of records out there, and he was a Cleveland kid, and Paul Brown, coach of the Cleveland Browns, knew of him, knew all his high school coaches, knew his college people, the connections, and they tried to get to Len Dawson and told Len, hey, tell everybody you're signing with the CFL. We really want you. And Len's like, nah, I'm not doing that. And the Steelers drafted him with the 6th pick, I believe it was, and the Browns were drafting 7th. So the Steelers drafted Len Dawson, future Hall of Famer, with Hank Stram, with the Chiefs, Super Bowl champion, and the Browns were stuck with a bum named Jim Brown. So instead of getting Dawson, the guy they wanted, they had to take Jim Brown. But and the Steelers, he kept Len Dawson for a couple of years with Buddy Parker, who had traded for Bobby Lane the next year. He had Bobby Lane as a quarterback. The trade was offered to him. He took Bobby Lane. The Steelers finished 6-0-1 with Bobby Lane. They had a couple Hall of Fame defensive players, Ernie Stautner and Jack Butler. And Buddy Parker loved Bobby Lane in '58, so they kept trading draft picks into the future to fill these holes, to get over the hump. And I'll get back to this later because I was thinking about Bobby Lane and what the Steelers are trying to do right now. Anyway, trading all those draft picks did not help. They eventually traded Len Dawson. Buddy Parker, the coach at the time, didn't like young quarterbacks. Len Dawson got traded to the Browns, ended up with the Chiefs, ended up in the Hall of Fame. The next great quarterback, the Steelers had Bobby Lane, and he was 31 when they acquired him in a trade, and he retired in '62. Buddy Parker pushed him out. Then in '63, realized when he was going for the playoffs that he had a good team. He tried to talk Lane into coming back, and Lane said no. And anyhow, the Steelers were just out of draft picks for the rest of the '60s because of what Parker did. He just ruined the franchise. Dan Rooney moved up in the organization, and then in 1969, Chuck Noll came, and they drafted Joe Green. And that worked so well that they went 1-13. But Joe Green was an impressive rookie. But the Steelers and the Bears finished 1-13 for the right to flip a coin to get the first pick of the 1970 draft. And there was a prize. His name was Terry Bradshaw. And the Chiefs' old adage reminds me of something Franklin Roosevelt might have told Churchill. Don't call the coin flip. The Chief told Dan, when Dan went off to the coin flip, they had a big celebration at I think it was a Hyatt, a ballroom, and they told the Chief told Dan, remember, never call the coin flip. Put the pressure on the other guy. He'll make the mistake. Of course, the Bears called the coin flip, and they called it wrong, and the Chiefs' advice paid off, and by doing nothing, it came to them. Terry Bradshaw came to them. And Chuck Noll learned something that year as they went on to 4 Super Bowls. He learned that the defensive tackle might be the key before you get the quarterback. And so into the 1983 draft they went with that old adage, and Chuck was determined to rebuild his 70s dynasty all over again. Forget about this superhero coming through Pitt that we all knew about, Dan Marino. I mean, what else could hit you in the face but Dan Marino? This isn't Kenny Pickett coming through Pitt and drafting Kenny Pickett. Dan Marino, I mean, tall, threw the ball. There were some rumors going around. The Chief checked those rumors out. The cop said it's just minor partying stuff. And Dan Marino was in my class at Pitt. It was a big school. I only ran across him one time. It was in a bar late at night at midnight. And he came over to our table. We were a bunch of writers being nerds. And he was so nice, and he was sober as a judge. So I always thought those rumors about Danny were a little far-fetched. And the Chief thought so too. And he wanted Dan Marino. But Chuck Noll, defensive tackle first. We did it with Joe Green. We're going to do it again. This is how we're rebuilding. So they took Gabe Rivera, let Dan Marino go for really no good reason. Gabe Rivera was an impressive prospect. I don't know who remembers Gabe at the time. He was coming on, and he showed a lot before that car accident. But Danny, I mean, how do you pass on Dan Marino? Come on. All right, so how many Hall of Famers have they passed on? And they did take Bradshaw, and so 83, Danny played about, did he play 20 years? He might have. So that could have covered them a long time. And then 2004 comes along. In 2001, I will say they did pass on Drew Brees. At the time, 6-foot quarterbacks were considered too small. But Drew Brees did go to Purdue, started for 4 years, beat Ohio State and Michigan, won the Big Ten as a senior, set all kind of records. They called it basketball on grass. It was the beginning of these spread offenses that we are so common today. Drew Brees was a mastermind at that time. And Bill Cowher, it wasn't considered one of the great, it wasn't like passing on Dan Marino, but they did pass on a Hall of Famer, and Drew Brees was, I think, the first pick of the second round. The Steelers took a defensive tackle, Casey Hampton, led them to help them win 2 Super Bowls. So the defensive tackle first mantra, I can't argue with it too much. But they did pass on Drew Brees in 2001, and this was after Kent Graham. And they had Cordell Stewart languishing on the bench, in and out of the lineup. They really needed a quarterback. So passing on Drew Brees, I'm not sure you want to give him a pass totally on that. And in 2004, here they come with Tommy Maddox was their quarterback. And in the draft leading up to 2004, I remember at the beginning of the week talking to Kevin Colbert about, these three quarterbacks, Eli Manning, Phillip Rivers, and a MAC player named Ben Roethlisberger. And I remember there was a lot of talk of Ben Roethlisberger a couple months before the draft being the number one pick overall. That kind of faded as Eli Manning's stock rose and Phillip Rivers' late stock rose. And Kevin Colbert looked at me and said, Roethlisberger could fall to us. I mean, he was incredulous. So I knew at the beginning of the week that Kevin Colbert had a lot of respect for Ben Roethlisberger. But as the week went on, the Steelers, they give most of the power to the head coach. And Bill Cowher liked Tommy Maddox, and he wanted a big offensive lineman named Shawn Andrews. And that leaked. I remember the assistant head coach was the offensive line coach at the time. Those are all the clues I'll give you. I'm not going to name his name, but he leaked to a good buddy of mine that the Steelers were going to draft Shawn Andrews. And that got into the Tribune Review story, Steelers looking at Shawn Andrews. And Tommy Maddox has said, in retrospect, I left the building Friday and they were going to draft Shawn Andrews. Well, Dan Rooney stepped in and said, hey, my dad wouldn't let me forget passing on Dan Marino till the day he died. You do not want to pass on a franchise quarterback if you get the chance. So that little reminder, I know Kevin Colbert didn't need the reminder, but Bill Cowher did. He wanted Shawn Andrews. And in the end, they ended up taking Ben Roethlisberger. So they started getting wise to these Hall of Fame quarterbacks that were falling to them. So that leads us to, well, there's one more, 2018. Was it 2018? Yeah, Roethlisberger, the year before he blew out his arm, and there are teams, the San Francisco 49ers had Joe Montana still winning Super Bowls, and they traded for Steve Young. The Green Bay Packers still had Brett Favre winning games. He was fairly young, drafted Aaron Rodgers. Then when Aaron Rodgers was still winning games, they drafted Jordan Love. So teams have drafted quarterbacks while their guy was still 35, 36. Nobody wants to hurt those prima donnas' feelings. But sometimes you, as an organization, you have to. And with Lamar Jackson was a really great college player. He was kind of new age with his running style, but he wasn't an erratic thrower. Like I look at the Alabama quarterback coming out today, Jalen Milroe. He runs a 4.3 40, but he can't throw the ball. I swear the Steelers are going to draft him. It's Cordell Stewart coming out, but Lamar Jackson could throw at least a lot better than people were giving him credit for. I thought he was a really good quarterback at Louisville. And we were sitting in that room. Mike Tomlin was, Ben was, I think, 35. It was the year before he blew his arm out. He was 35, and Tomlin was in the press room talking about Terrell Edmonds, and the TV was on, but the sound was down. And the Ravens had just traded up for Lamar Jackson. And Tomlin looked up, and I could see his face went, I swear, his face went ashen. He went ghost-like. And I asked him, what did you think about that? You're going to have to deal with that guy. He's in your division now because the Ravens had traded up into the first round to grab him. And he was all cool. No, we got Terrell Edmonds. We really like Terrell. And I remember I had to go somewhere out the door as he was leaving, and he turned to Bert Loughton, the PR. How did the Ravens get up into that? I mean, this bothered Tomlin, and I wrote about it. I said, this pick is bothering Tomlin. I think they passed on a guy that's going to haunt them for years, and Lamar Jackson is haunting them. So I'm gonna slap them for passing on Lamar Jackson for Terrell Edmonds when Ben Roethlisberger was about done. And you remember that year they took a third-round quarterback named Mason Rudolph. And what did Ben say? I'm not helping him. It's not my job. So Ben's feelings were hurt. And that's probably why they didn't want to draft a first rounder, because Ben did not want to deal with that kind of thing. Sometimes you have to push that prima donna ego aside and do what's best for your organization. So anyway, that leads us to this year, and I wrote, this speech was a column I wrote a couple weeks ago when the Steelers were interested in Matthew Stafford, because I was a little worried about the same thing with Russell Wilson. The Steelers got a 36, 37-year-old quarterback. Matthew Stafford's 37. Are they going to continue trading picks? They made the playoffs with Russell Wilson. Are they going to look at the Bobby Lane year like Buddy Parker did and think, if I trade more draft picks and we fill more holes, we can win that playoff game or we can win that Super Bowl, whatever they might think they're close. I think they're not that close. I think they either need to build fortify the lines. They've been doing it on the offensive line, and now it's time for the defensive line, and that harkens back to taking the defensive tackle first. Just like Chuck Noll came through and Bill Cowher did, unless a quarterback smacks you in the face. I don't think there's a quarterback in this draft going to smack him in the face. I mean, they have no backups either. They could draft one in the second, third round, and they've got to start developing somebody. I don't think that franchise quarterback is there, and I think the Matthew Stafford emergency has passed. I know people are excited about it, but at what cost? Do you trade a second-round pick for a 37-year-old quarterback just so you can make the playoffs again? Navigating the post-franchise quarterback wilderness is difficult. But as history has shown, these quarterbacks become self-evident, and they will come to you. It's hard. You have to be patient. It's really difficult. You have to go through your Kenny Pickett's. You have to draft a couple second, third rounders. I like a guy named Tyler Shuck out of Louisville this year. He's 26 years old, but I like a lot of things about him. Second rounder, that's fine. I mean, that's a good backup quarterback. There are some, Will Howard at Ohio State might be a good backup, might become a decent first round starter, but I don't see a first rounder. I see a defensive tackle first, like Chuck Noll always said. Take that defensive tackle, build your team. Don't be trading second round picks to fill another hole with another. Parker showed that doesn't work. It's no day at the beach. Especially when you're under a lot of fire. And that was how I ended my column, harken back to Churchill at Normandy. It eventually does become self-evident. You do the right thing, and it can become a day at the beach, even if you're under heavy fire. So, thank you.
So
any questions? We can talk
if you'll
football.
wait for the microphone before you ask your question so they can hear you online. Nanette will bring it around.
I'm sorry? What was that?
If anybody has any questions, I will bring the mic to you. Raise your hand.
I think I saw just recently that Troy Polamalu bought into the Steelers.
No, not that I'm aware of.
Okay, I thought I read that he was.
Well, I'm not going to totally say. I mean, I've been running around. I've been pretty busy, health issues, things like that. I'm doing really well though. Had to overcome some stuff.
As to why
But I don't think so. But I'll look at it. I don't know. They do accept these minority interest, minority shareholders. Yeah.
I've just noticed recently there are a lot of fake Steeler sites that are pushing false news stories.
Oh,
And
on Facebook I saw.
On
yeah.
Facebook, yeah. That's
Yeah.
what, I think this is one of those.
Okay. Be careful with Facebook.
You have to be careful.
I don't know what's gotten into Facebook. It's a mess right now.
Yeah.
Okay. Go ahead.
I'll be right there.
Oh, I see. Okay. Hey. Harris? Najee Harris?
Yeah.
I can't say I'm a big fan. I kind of wish he would go. I don't think he fits what they want. It's such a good draft of running backs. I think they can get a guy in the third or fourth round to replace him. And I like Jalen Warren.
I like the running back from Ohio State. You're one of them.
Yeah. You guys know Ohio State better than I do, probably. What's his name? Travion Henderson?
Yes.
Yeah. There's all kind of good backs in this draft.
I think it's the coaching, too, in my opinion.
Who?
Tallman's got to go.
Oh, okay.
More questions?
Anything, Tomlin, anything, any modern Steelers history? Go ahead. We got to wait for the microphone.
What do you think about that Jason Dart? He's supposed to be coming out as a quarterback, be a good backup, or what's the word on
Jackson
him?
Dart, his stock is really rising. They're talking about him as the second quarterback drafted. I know a lot of people are saying that my guy Tyler Shuck is worthy of the second quarterback drafted. That Shadur Sanders, Dion's son, seems to be falling. And I did a podcast last night. I asked my guys, I said, if Shadur Sanders falls to 21, what do you think? And somebody said, let him keep falling. And I tend to agree. He hasn't really impressed me. And then you get the Deion Sanders circus that goes with it. I don't. Hey, he could turn out to be the quarterback that slaps him in the face that is self-evident. Somebody that was supposed to be the number one pick that falls to 21. But I'm not seeing Dan Marino in him. But Jackson Dart, I mean, he throws it hard. The way he throws reminds me of Brett Favre to a degree. And Brett was a second-round pick because he wasn't the tallest guy. And, hey, maybe this guy, but he hasn't done it for me yet. I like Tyler Shuck, and I like Will Howard a little better, too. Yeah.
Yeah, so how do you grade Tomlin as a coach?
I figured this question was coming. I'm there all the time, okay? I'll just tell you a little Tomlin story. And I get along with him. I really like him personally. And he likes me. Always asks about my daughter because she was an athlete. She got a soccer scholarship to Ohio U. And he would always ask about her. And now I always ask about his kids. His daughter is going to Georgia on a gymnastics scholarship. So we talk. And in the spring especially we talk. When he came over to where me and a bunch of other writers were standing. And he thought that the thing about Kenny Pickett's small hands was a big joke. And all the other writers thought it was a big joke too, that it's those draftniks out there that come up with the stupidest stuff. His hand's too small. But his hands were 8.5 inches from here to here. And I measured, when his came out, I measured my hand, 8.5 inches. Same exact small hands as Kenny Pickett. And when those balls come bouncing over to me on the sideline, I can't grip them. And they're slippery NFL balls. I cannot grip them. I can't throw like this. And I'm always real nervous because all the players are watching the writer throw it back in. I give it the old underhand spin because I know I'm going to embarrass myself because I can't grip the thing. So Tomlin comes over and he goes, how about those small hands on Kenny Pickett, trying to get a rise out of us. I said, Mike, my hands are the same exact size as him, and I can't grip that ball. I think they are small. And he walked away shaking his head, thinking how stupid we were. And I thought maybe I was stupid because then Kenny had a great preseason. But, hey, maybe I'm right. I don't know. But he can throw it better than I can, I'll tell you that. But so I'm a little biased about Tomlin. I like him. I see his energy every day at practice. I see how he communicates with the players. People think he's a player's coach, but I've seen him explode, and you have to be to a degree. Today's a big recruiting game. Like they recruited Russell Wilson. They got a veteran quarterback for minimum wage last year because they put the old college recruiting game on him. So he can do that. He recruited the linebacker, Queen. Because they would talk on the sideline. He's that kind of guy. There's a lot of things I like about him. Now, I criticize him down the stretch. I criticize their overuse of Najee Harris instead of Jalen Warren. I think he gets in with a player and he just doesn't give the other guy a chance. And man, you can't dismiss the blowout losses in the playoffs. I get not having a playoff win. The Kansas City Chiefs went 11 years without a playoff win while the Steelers are winning 2 Super Bowls in the 2000s. And they went through 3-4 coaches, but they went through 11 years. Now, look at them. They got the quarterback. Yeah, well, this team doesn't have a quarterback. It can just re-sign Justin Fields, great. But don't be spending draft picks on filling holes because Justin Fields might get you one playoff win. So they need the franchise quarterback. They need to be patient. I know fans are upset with Tomlin. I personally like him. I watch his energy. There came a time with Bill Cowher when he was even younger than Mike is now, where Bill seemed to lost his energy, especially that last year, 2006. He just had, and I also know in spring he gave the coaching over to his coordinators. He would watch up on the balcony where the writers used to stand, overlooking the practice field. Then we'd look down and he'd be gone. So I mean, his energy wasn't as good as Mike's. I think Mike really has an energy for it. I think his message, we're all tired of hearing the same message, but the players don't. The players come and go. And he still relates to them. He still fires them up, even though we're all tired of it. I mean, I know what the fans' argument is, and I'm probably in the minority here, but I still like him. But I mean, he's going to have to get a quarterback in the next 2-3 years, or he will get run out of town.
Any more
Does
questions?
that answer your question? Not to your satisfaction. I do see his energy. He loves football. He works that practice field. He's on top of these players. He'll chew them out, but he doesn't embarrass them. And when he gets in a press conference and when he said George Pickens needs to mature at a press conference this year, I couldn't believe it. I mean, that's something he says in a meeting and behind closed doors. For him to say it publicly, and that's the thing, we all want him to say these things publicly. So when he doesn't, everybody says he coddles them. But when he said that about George Pickens, man, Pickens is going to be gone. Pickens will play out his contract this year because they won't be able to trade him to get anything back. But they're not going to extend him. They're not going to extend him. Pickens is a real problem. Oh.
Any more questions?
Well, the obvious thing is, let's say you throw Tomlin under the bus, who are you going to get? Jimmy Johnson retired, you know?
Well, I hear that, but when Chuck Noll retired, who were they going to get? Some young kid, 34-year-old that nobody heard of, named Bill Cowher. And when Cowher left, who were they going to get? Another, 34 years old? I think he was 34 as well. And nobody knew Mike Tomlin. So, I mean, this organization misses Dan Rooney. I thought he was the genius behind everything. You know, he's the one that ran Buddy Parker out. Dan was a young man in 1965 when he finally told Buddy Parker, stop trading all these draft picks. And Buddy Parker got mad and said, I quit. And the chief would have taken him back the next day, which he did like 10 times. Dan wouldn't. Dan was young, and Dan hired Chuck Noll, and they took off, and Dan hired Bill Cowher, and Dan was a big part of hiring Mike Tomlin, although there's a lot of people, I can't get confirmation, but a lot of people said they were going to hire Russ Grimm. And Roger Goodell called and said, how could you have the Rooney Rule and not give a guy you know, I'm not being racist. I'm just spouting facts that they had the contract to Russ Grimm going through the Xerox machine when Omar Khan called the Tribune Review, my guy, Pursuta, told him Russ Grimm's being hired, and they ran the story. Next day they changed their mind and hired Mike Tomlin. But still, he was an unknown. It was a good hire, a great hire, I think. But that's how I refute that. But you make a good point. There's really... you might not get that guy. You know, Dan Rooney's first hire was Bill Austin. So, before Chuck Noll. And because Vince Lombardi told the chief, oh, my guy, it's Bill Austin. And the chief told Dan, hey, it was Vince Lombardi's, you know, gave him a thumbs up. We got to take him. And then he was terrible.
Yeah, I read in the Pittsburgh paper a couple weeks ago where It's one of the sports writers was writing about Tolman handcuffed Russell Wilson. You know what I'm talking about.
Well, yeah.
He wouldn't let him call audibles.
Well-
Whenever he seen, when you got 8 guys in the box, I don't care if you don't know how to play football, you don't run the ball right at them.
Well, what I heard is that they were tired of Russ calling bombs on 3rd and 4th and 1. Those were the plays in particular that they. Now, whether they handcuffed him totally, I don't know. I don't know, but I heard later that that's what they were tired. And I'll tell you, as a fan, and you guys may agree with me, I was a little tired of, sometimes it works on 3rd and 1. 4th and 2, throw something short, get the first down. And that just got old. And Russ would see single coverage on 3rd and 1, and he'd go deep with his moon balls. And that's what they were tired of. I'll tell you this. When Tomlin came in and told the quarterback's coach, we're going to make a change from Justin to Russ Wilson this week. The quarterback coach rolled his eyes back. Tomlin said, "What's the matter?" And the quarterback coach, I think his name's Tom Arth. Arthur Smith is the offensive coordinator, but he agrees with the quarterback coach. Tom Arth said, "Russ is a little much." And Tomlin laughed and said, "Ben Roethlisberger would have steamrolled you." Meaning these big shot quarterbacks are not easy to work with. But personally, I want a quarterback who will clap back at the coach and say, "No, I don't like that." Maybe a little sparring session, So that goes back to that. Justin Fields, I really like. The coaches really like him. He's a sponge. He wants to absorb. He knows he has a lot to learn. He didn't learn anything with the Bears. That's why I kind of want to see him get another chance. He's young. Problem is, he showed no real proclivity to reading defenses last year. He had trouble setting the blocking in front of him. The coaches would work with him, and he would absorb it all. So they liked working with him. They didn't like Russ. Russ would argue with them all the time, and they thought it was hard. And so Tomlin thought it was funny. Yeah, I would have liked to watch you work with Roethlisberger. So.
I just wanted to ask, what do you think of Arch Manning? I mean, he'll be coming out of Texas in a year or two, or whenever they get done. Maybe, and then the Steelers could just hold over with whatever they decide now, and then take a shot at him. Would he be a franchise, maybe a Manning brother? I mean,
you got to believe that came up on our podcast last night, and I said, "Has he even played?" So I haven't watched a lot of Texas. So I said, "Has he even played yet?" And they go, "Yeah, he filled in. He looked really good when he filled in for injury." So they're expecting him not only to come out for the draft next year, but to be the #1 pick. And also, to go with what you're saying, the Steelers are hosting the draft. So can you imagine announcing that pick at Heinz Field? So that fits in with my whole talk today. It becomes self-evident sometimes. So that's the hope. But right now, the only quarterback they have is a guy named Skylar Thompson. They picked him off the scrap heap. So if they use Skylar Thompson, maybe they'll go 1-16 and get that #1 pick.
Okay, anything else? Oh, we've got one more.
There was so much talk with the officiating for the Buffalo Bills and Kansas City. Is that hard to write about? I mean, you can't really,
Well, I didn't have to write about it, thank God.
everyone saw it.
Well, I mean, what was it? There are two things. For one, I mean, the Raiders, remember when the Raiders and Steelers played all the time? And the Raiders would cheat, but they were really good, but they were dirty. And they said the Steelers were dirty, but we saw it from a different side. And the Raiders every year led the league in penalties. And they would complain. Well, if it was fair, no, it's not about being fair. It's about you committing more penalties. Stop cheating. Stop playing dirty ball, and they won't get. And the Kansas City Chiefs are good. They don't commit as many penalties because they're smart. Now, that's one thing. That's what I would say to that. The other thing is quarterbacks like Tom Brady and Pat Mahomes aren't real big. We remember Ben Roethlisberger. Remember when Haloti Ngata put his fist through Ben's face mask on the first series and busted his nose? Blood was all over him. Ben's bleeding. His nose is crooked. He's looking at the ref. You're not going to call a penalty on that. And the ref said, suck it up, big guy. Because when you're 6'5" and 250 pounds, it looks different than when you're Tom Brady and you get hit a little late. And it just has an effect on official, and they're going to call that roughing. And I think Pat Mahomes gets a lot of that too. So I think there's two sides to that. I really don't believe that there's any fixing going on.
Even some of the announcers mentioned, like Tom Brady mentioned a few things.
Well, Mahomes
When
does
that's
get
that game.
Mahomes does get some calls, just like Brady used to. There's a lot of respect. There was a lot of respect for Brady. Also, it has to do, I think, with their slight build. And when they get rocked, you're getting a flag. But when Roethlisberger did, I mean, are you going to throw a flag on that? You know, Brady's already been 3 times today. So I'm not a big believer in fixed games. But then the NBA goes and, refs get caught. So.
We've got one more question, anybody?
All right. Well,
right.
thanks a lot.
Thank you.